welcome back into studio now. I'm not alone. We're joined by, of course, our resident political analyst, TK Pooe, just to take us through what has happened since yesterday. TK, thank you for your time. Good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us. I mean, your reaction to the top seven, we haven't had this conversation. The top seven has been announced. 3 women are there. KZN not having not a single representative from the province, but also the question around minorities. Are they represented?
No, not at all. And it's something I think about 2 months back, former President Becky raised, which is to say how the ANC has actually become more, I'll say, singular in its, let's say, in its complexion, to put it in that way. And look, if we do believe in issues such as diversity, not for the sake of just having diversity, but because my argument has always been that having different people in the room, whether it's women, men, even religious groupings, it brings different flavor. It actually tells you what's happening to all different 4 corners of South Africa. Now, if the ANC claims they want to rule over all of South Africa, including places like the Western Cape, you are going to need a sizable coloured and you're going to need a sizable white community, not just because they're white, but because there's something they bring differently to the table. And it's something the ANC really has to work on, not for the sake of, because I know other parties say, look, we're diverse. That's not the point. The point is, in what they are bringing in, are they allowed at the table, and are they bringing their best foot forward? And I think going forward, it's something many parties still really need to work on.
Yeah. Also, speaking of diversity, the issue around provinces being represented. We heard about the overrepresentation of Gauteng, KZN, even though they put quite a fight, I have to say, especially when it comes to the presidency candidacy. Again, Begim Dolo almost downplaying it, saying it's not about provinces, it's not about which province actually leads within the party, it's about a united ANC. But we know that a majority of the ANC members equally come from KwaZulu-Natal, and like you're saying, it should reflect all corners of the country, especially in as far as we have 9 provinces of the country. We should see a representation of all provinces.
It is, but I think there's a deeper question that needs to be asked in terms of why were other, let's say, provinces and other ANC entities repelling KZN? Because I think that's a better way. I do agree with Mr. Mtolo that sometimes it can be made bigger, because unfortunately when it becomes made a bigger issue, then the issue of ethnicity comes in. And I think we should really try veer away from it. The better ones to ask is, why are people almost repelling? Because remember, this is the second time they have come to a conference and walked away with nothing. So maybe there is an issue of, and this is my hypothesis, that I think the candidate they put up was not actually the best candidate. And I say this with all due respect to the good Dr. Mzweli Mkhize. And it raises the bigger issue, has KZN actually had a proper debrief to say, how do we actually move from former President Jacob Zuma? Love him or hate him, he really was, one might say, a monumental figure in KZN politics. And they seem to have not really come back to say, listen, who do we now move forward to actually represent us moving forward? And also, there's also a bit of a danger, which I think they understand better than most, which is to say, they've been losing a lot of ground in KZN. We used to think, oh, well, the IFP is dead. They're not coming back. All of a sudden, coming to the next election, and as I always say, 2029, there's a possibility that KZN could actually go back to the IFP. And that is the bigger issue, which says, so while I understand the issue of representation here, it's important, the bigger issue is KZN is failing to bring on the right candidates. Remember, people relate with people they see and can say, look, I can invest in. And what KZN is doing is they're failing to see that, look, people cannot reflect with what we're seeing there. So let's reflect on that. The people we're bringing forward are not really there. And hence, for me, as I keep saying, Mr. Ntuli was a loss.
I was about to say, what about Mr. Ntuli then?
They didn't support him.
They didn't support him at all. And I mean, I saw reports from various Nkapalala saying the reason why they did not support either, it seems there's also a division within the province. There's a lack of unity within the province, individuals who are doing almost the same, the different things. So it begs to question, what about the province's, single centralized mandate then coming into conference?
And maybe, I guess maybe historically looking, we should be, that's why I said the figure of President Jacob Zuma, love or hate him, is big. Before President Jacob Zuma, KZN actually used to have the same problem. Everybody knew that they had a lot of branches, but there was always an issue of how do we actually come to conference united? So this is a long-running historical issue for KZN. And that's why I said the issue is the candidate that they put forward. And under President Jacob Zuma, it was easy to unify around him. And that's why he was such a uniting figure for them. But in the absence of him, they're basically going backwards in history. And until they really ask the question or answer the question, who do we put forward? And why are people really saying they can no longer do without us. Because I think for many of your older viewers, the specter of the, because I think sometimes maybe younger people really don't quite understand what the 90s looked like for South Africa. There was a time where people just really thought that you'd never see the IFP come back again. But the strategic thing the IFP have done, they had to answer the question, why are people repelling us? What did they do? Yes, look, they had a succession plan, which one can actually look at it as two phases. The current president, who is mild-mannered but very sharp in what he wants to do. And they're slowly starting to even get away, respectfully, from the former president, Mr. Buthelezi, where you can actually think, oh, IFP, no, it's not necessarily his party, there's other people. KZN ANC has not done that post Mr. Jacob Zuma.
I want to talk about President Jacob Zuma and his influence. We've seen some KZN delegates going to eNCA, some saying they need the advice and wisdom of the former president, some saying his influence can actually assist certain candidates. Has that influence waned off?
I'll answer it by saying, looking at what's happened in America, where many Republicans going into the midterms went to former President Donald Trump saying, please give us lay your hands on us and bless us for this, and they lost. I think Mr. Jacob Zuma is no longer what he used to be. And it should be the case. Look, you're a former president. You represent the past. We should be looking to the future. And if they're still of that mindset that they still need him, then it begs the question that maybe they're not really the people that should be leading the province. So while respectfully to the former president, he has played his part, the issue for you to look back on him says more about what you are lacking and your lack of vision for the future than it is about him.
Quite interesting developments. TK, I want to also talk about the new incoming Secretary-General. He wasted no time cracking the whip about who's in town, saying he will not tolerate any Casey and Jojo fambling during the media briefing. There's a new sheriff in town, and he's going to lead from the front, saying don't expect any tweets at 1 a.m. from him because he needs to enforce discipline. And that's what some of our media colleagues were talking about, saying what work lies ahead for Fikile Mbalula when it comes to him being the custodian of the ANC constitution as far as discipline is concerned, but also the political education of the ANC. And it's what we've seen and witnessed just these past couple of days alone.
Well, I think it's actually a bigger role. I love the way you framed it because it's actually bigger than that. All the issues we've just discussed about how do you attract a new diversity within the ANC in terms of minority populations. He has to deal with that.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, the issue of, look, I know 20 Rand, it makes sense a bit to have 20 Rand as membership, but what do you get from that 20 Rand? And the idea that, look, we are now in a digital era. Does it really make, if you want to attract, let's say, a middle class and people that are working, which unfortunately is a few people in South Africa, can you really hold a branch meeting for 4 hours? So things like that. So I think what's called the modernization, I call it modernization because I don't believe in the issue of renewal, because you can't renew that which is dead. So the issue of that. So at an infrastructure, because this is basic infrastructure, the ANC has a long way to go. Now the question of, can you do this in 5 years? And also, look, himself, look, unfortunately, I always say, past this prologue, I can only judge you on how you have led other institutions.
Right.
And Mr. Mbalula always gets off to a great start. Look, give him credit, his resume has.
Yeah.
But the issue is the position of the Secretary-General is called the engine for a reason. It says you need sustenance. You actually need a lot of quality within you. Does he have it? Now, we're not casting aspersions on him. I'm just simply saying past this prologue and the issue of does he have it. And I think, let's say it's going to be an interesting thing. And unfortunately, there was no betting company this time around, so it will be interesting to see can he sustain it, because the last one also couldn't sustain it.
Yeah, and I suppose my last question too, because we could talk about this all day. Dr. Gwen Ramogopa spoke at the PBF business briefing this morning, starting off, running by addressing the media and also other stakeholders in business. When it comes to finances, funding, resources for the ANC, what do you think lies ahead for him? What should he prioritize? I suppose there is also the spotlight on her because she is the first woman in 110 years to occupy such a significant role as a TG, but also workers hadn't been paid in quite a while within the ANC. That's an issue. We also know that in most of their business briefings or gala dinners in the past, they weren't as packed to capacity with funders ready to pledge their support anonymously, more so than publicly as in the past. So what do you think are some of the challenges she'll have to maneuver?
Two things. When you think of the ANC, what first comes to mind? For most citizens, they've shown us at the voting booth that it's not a good value proposition. So until the value and what the ANC looks like changes, why would I publicly as a company come up to attach my name to it? Because you remember, money is it's a voice. It's saying I'm for what you're putting across. And the ANC for the last 10 decades has not been putting across a good story. And secondly, the way you framed it, the idea of how do you almost not or cutting costs, but the issue of saying, does the ANC as an institution make sense? For instance, I know there are 9 provinces and you want to have a footing in everything else, but do you really need PEC offices? Do you need, because remember, it's a PEC, there's regions, and then there's branches. And out of all, if for every province, there's a full-time employment there. So the question comes in, do you really need all of that? My understanding is that, look, if you have to look at it as a business, what don't you need and what can you cut? And that's why it didn't make sense for me to increase the deputy secretary positions.
Right.
You can't pay people, but you want to increase. So that's how they really need to look at it, as a business cost-cutting initiative, to say, how do we put our best foot forward as an institution that is run properly, understanding that we can no longer employ everyone.
Well, I have to leave it there. TK, thank you so much for speaking to me this morning, political analyst TK Pooe. We're quite thought-provoking there in terms of that oxymoron, Fundo, when it comes to cost-cutting, but also adding that additional role, which makes up the top 7. Well, listen, they promised to speak to the media today before the end of conference. They will be outlining, I suppose, their mandate as the new senior leadership of the organization. We'll wait and see with our reporter stationed across Nasrec to give us all the latest developments.